My name is Jordan Farmer. This is part 2 of episode 24 of the Uncommon Conversations podcast with your pal Austin as my guest today. We've had a wonderful conversation. We're having a good back and forth, and we're just talking about how when you can have a good back and forth despite disagreeing, it can be very refreshing and, more important, move the conversation along more broadly. And we're back. Well, I just want to say I really appreciate what you said, man. I am trying to do that very much, and I feel fortunate that I am the person that's more willing for these things to be uncomfortable, because it is emotionally difficult to reframe your ideology. It's literally an emotionally, psychologically painful process. So
it is.
I don't judge anyone for that, and the reason why I'm so willing to do it in part is because I know, and I've known this for consciously said it to myself for 12 years now. Even if we have a really bad disagreement, well, first off, if we have an absolute agreement, then there's no threat and I'm not going to learn anything. But if we have a disagreement, then there's at least a chance I will learn something really interesting. And so it's worth the exchange. As long as we can still say, I respect you and still, love you as a human being at the end, then we can do this. And more importantly, the broader conversation on the long form issues and on the day-to-day needs to get more nuanced. We need to be able to see, because I genuinely believe, and I think the science backs up, that most people have essentially an average personality and sensibility. They could recognize, so basically you sort of touched on this. You touched on half of it, and you basically touched 85% of this. So the left is the collectivist, compassionate perspective, saying what can the system do for all individuals? And the right is what can the individual operating within the system and the traditional system, more importantly, how can they competently act in that way themselves to do the best and to serve the system from the bottom up? And so you have tradition and the cutting edge. You have individual duty and collective compassion. And you could say, if you're not being compassionate, you're not doing your duty. And you could say, if people are being compassionate to you, but you're not doing your duty, you're not being compassionate to them. You're taking advantage of them. And so that we have this essential duality of values that I think most people in the middle can wrap their heads around and recognize that it's a conflict, but one that we can work with. One that, illuminates more than it restricts, I guess.
Yeah. I like what you said about it being difficult and painful to reframe deeply held beliefs or, long-standing viewpoints. And you're absolutely right about that. And I made a video recently on TikTok about this, I see a lot in my comment section where people will say, stop shaming me for my political beliefs, or because they're just responding to something I'm saying in a video. I'm not talking to them. I'm not even talking to that person. I'm putting out a message to the collective, whoever's watching, and they'll say in the comments stop shaming me or stop shaming people for their beliefs. And I'll be like, it's interesting. If you are feeling a sense of shame based off of what I'm saying, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking if that shame response is a defensive response. Something that the person is saying is making you feel bad about a deeply held belief you have, a position that you've really been rooted in, and you feel like that person is trying to make you feel bad, and that's rude, that's impolite. But a lot of times these conversations, it's not really about politeness or about making sure I'm not hurting your feelings. It's about both of us being very direct and honest about where we're coming from and understanding that that's going to cause a sense of defensiveness. There's going to be a reaction of okay, you're saying that to try to make me feel bad about what I think. And it's not said in a way to shame you, especially when I'm making a video. I'm I don't even know who you are. I'm not shaming you. But if you feel shame watching me talk about this thing, it might be because some part of you is recognizing truth in what I'm saying. And you're thinking, shit, I've been wrong about this. And that sucks because it means that I've been operating and making choices based on a wrong presumption. And that's making me feel shameful about past things I've said to other people, actions I've taken. But it's
just feeling dumb.
it's that feeling of and I, anyone who's done any kind of serious introspection and attempt to grow spiritually, intellectually, has felt this way, has felt, crap, I was an idiot. Oh man, I felt that way many, many times in my life. I feel that way regularly. People check me on my side of politics. People will check me and be like, hey, just so you know, that thing you said is actually like ableist because of this, this, or this. And my initial response is like, oh, get out of here with this mamby-pam. Like, oh, shut up. You know what I was saying. And then I have to stop and be like, I'm being defensive because I think that they're right. And because I think I was actually kind of excluding people with what I said. And so my defensive response to that is like, oh, you know what I meant? Like, get out of here with your like holier than thou virtue signaling. Like, and I have to realize that I'm being defensive. I feel a little bit ashamed that like I put out a bit, yeah.
I think you're touching on something that's so interesting and something that I struggle with because I think about these things a lot. And I absolutely believe that toughness is a virtue and should be cultivated. But I also know some people, neurologically and because of trauma or life or whatever, are in their biology, in their nature, more sensitive than other people.
Yeah.
And so I might not perceive something as offensive, but that doesn't mean like that someone else might not. And even if they do, and this is where sort of the toughness thing and sort of logic and truth and other valuable things come in, just because you are offended by something does not mean you are justified in that offense, because it can be a misunderstanding. Often people will say, you said this, which is close to this, which is really, really bad. And if you know the person, like you would know that it's just a time where they're not super diligent with how they're saying something. So they're coming close to saying something that sounds like something else. Many things, I call it, not everything is racist. Sometimes it's just race-ish. Like it's in that ballpark, but it's not quite like if you philosophize about it. Like some people prefer African American, some people prefer black. And if you call someone black or whatever, you could say, oh, why are you so focused on the race? Or you could say, well, I don't think there's anything really that different about being black or white or Hispanic or Asian. It's just that's the best descriptive word. That's kind of, for the sake of it, that's what they are. So, I could say there's Ted, I could say there's that, whatever. Like, it is, so it's interesting for that reason, where there's that race-ish part of it. It's not necessarily racist. Now, if the person is saying, I don't want to hire black people, well, then that's racist. Like that, then you can see it philosophically. There's some sort of discrimination in the way you're treating different people. But again, if it's just, there's this category of white that refers to everyone of European descent. There's this category of black that refers to everyone of African descent. And then there's this category of, sort of Latino would probably be the best one to just sort of encapsulate all those people. And then, Asian is just the other big one. Well, and then and Indian is like another little nuance, because they do have a distinct culture and look distinctly sort of different on average than like Southeast and Northeast Asian. So
here's the other thing about that stuff too, is the thing about that stuff is just like this work, if you're going to have conversations like this, if you're going to have nuanced conversations like this, you need to be willing to go through the discomfort of it and not be and recognize when you're being defensive and try to like slow down and listen more. That's the same thing with that stuff too. It's like, if you want to try to navigate that space of like, what is everyone calling themselves these days? It takes effort. You have to put in effort. You have to like be willing to ask. You have to be willing to ask communities and be inquisitive and be interested and be curious. And so I think sometimes people are like, well, I can't keep track of it. There's just too many different things to call. And I'm not trying to be rude. I just can't keep track of it. It's like, well, but again, being a person who wants to be accountable for your thoughts and your words and your speech and set aside that defensive action, you have to take some uncomfortable work to make sure you're putting in the effort to know, what, like, I'm doing my best. And I, on my podcast all the time, I say the wrong things. I misgendered these people like the other day who were on my podcast. There was these two people and I the whole time I had been using he, him pronouns for them. And halfway through the podcast, they told me they use they, them pronouns. And I was like, I didn't even ask, you know? But it like, I do stuff like that. And I think that people need to understand that it's okay to acknowledge, whoops, I made a mistake. You're going to make mistakes. And to just like move forward and try to do better. But
well,
what
it's
happens,
like there's a difference between a mistake and a misunderstanding. And
Right.
it was more so a misunderstanding. You weren't saying, like, you didn't know they preferred they, and then you messed it up. And even then, that could be a mistake.
And they understood that. They weren't upset. They weren't like, how dare you? They understood that it was.
I think it's interesting because not everyone has that. You talked about, like, you need to engage with these communities and you need to have whatever. If someone's like no one in their friends group, and I'm not saying they don't have a trans person as a friend or they don't have a black person as a friend, that might be the case, that might not be. But that person might not have anyone in their life that would ever ask like about a pronoun thing or something like that. And so it's kind of like, I can't keep up with all these. So the way they see it is like, there's this expectation that I'm supposed to keep up with like celebrity pronouns and random like public people's pronouns and all this stuff. Like that's kind of, I think, how they're like we say, reacting to the stupid. That's kind of how they're reacting. If it was just, if your friend came to you and said, and like a reasonable friend of yours. So we'll say, because there's unreasonable friends that I would say, you know, screw you. I'm not wasting my time even thinking about how I because like, if I'm talking to you, I'm not saying he a lot in reference to, you know, our discussion. It's when I'm talking to somebody else that I'm using the pronoun. So it's like, it's not always the case, but it can be that. That's a little side note. But if someone that is a reasonable friend of yours came and said, this is how I feel, and I feel like it just hurts me whenever you say this other way. So I prefer, if it's cool with you, to not do that. I'm just more comfortable with that. Yeah. Like if that is the question, then I think a lot more people are like, yeah, whatever weird. You want to be called Dr. Fitty Diddle? Like I'll call you what you want. You're my boy. You know, like that. It's such a different.
I absolutely want to. When someone comes to me and lets me know that I've done harm and that I've hurt them in some way, before I have my defense, and maybe my defensive reaction is my first reaction always because I can't help it. It's my knee-jerk reaction. So whatever. Like maybe I can't help but be like, I didn't do that. You're too sensitive, or like whatever. I want to make sure that before I like respond to them, I consider what they're saying and consider like, oh, could I have done harm? And then I want to be gentle with this stuff. I want to like because my knee-jerk reactions, my defensive reactions are very like quick and harsh and cutting and fast. And I want to try to be gentle with this stuff. When someone's coming to me and letting me know, hey, you've hurt me with this thing. You've done harm. I want to understand that I'm going to have a defensive reaction and try to find the gentleness, try to find the softness of like, okay, this person's trusting me by coming to me and letting me know this. They're not just like talking shit behind my back. They're coming to me and being like, hey, I want to give you an opportunity to, you know, understand that. But also sometimes it's like people just say it in a very easy way too. Sometimes people are like, oh, I actually prefer this. And it's really simple. And that's really nice too. Just light, simple, gentle. Doesn't need to be heavy. Doesn't need to be like, oh, well, okay. You expect me to remember that? It's just like, oh, okay. Like someone just like, you call someone like James and they're like, I actually prefer Jimmy. And you're like, oh, okay. Like, okay. Yeah, great. I'll try to remember.
And also
that.
like,
you know?
So it's interesting, the sensitivity thing. There's the public discourse side of it. And we can just say, you're not always going to be able to be sensitive enough for everyone or to like make everyone happy in a public discourse. You should still try to be careful or like thoughtful with your words, have intention with your words, and do like your effect with your words matters. Like I don't believe, like you sort of mentioned earlier, like if some crazy fan of yours did something, or someone who is like if someone like there's plenty of evil people that, you know, will cite good people and try to be on their side. And it's more so like the racist and the Ben Shapiro thing. I think it's like Ben Shapiro is like, I'm not racist. And then this actual racist over here is like, I'm not racist. And then they're just both kind of standing next to each other. But there's not like in 2016, this is an objective fact by, I think it was the ACLU. But anyways, Ben Shapiro was like the #1 like target of anti-Semitism. And because he's such a famous Jew, like he gets a lot of heat, and there is a giant gap between the white nationalists and the the pro-Jewish sort of
Yeah.
factions on the right. There's a giant dividing wall, and you can see it. Like, they don't let them. Like, Nick Fuentes has never been on the Daily Wire. Like, that won't happen.
Yeah.
Because, and like, Nick Fuentes isn't on, or even Richard Spencer's not on Fox News. I don't know if he's been on Fox News, and even that, I got to be careful. You can have someone on that is an evil person just to show that they're an evil person. So I got to be careful even with that. Just because you've had someone like Farrakhan is the left wing sort of, oh, he's been known to take pictures and shake hands with Louis Farrakhan, and it's like, do you have any idea how many people these people have like shook hands with and taken pictures with? Like, you need more of a tie than that kind of a thing. Like, that doesn't mean Obama actually thinks that the Jews need to be exterminated or whatever. Like he's not secret Black Hitler. Like that's sort of the assumption, the tie, but that's not actually the reality. And so,
no, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right that just association is not does not denote guilt. No one is guilty by association, by just simply having someone, you know, and I think
but if nothing but racists agree with your ideology, you should look into your ideology. Like, I don't disagree with that. Like,
I think
you should have that conscious and awareness, and you know,
I think
no one should be like okay with being a racist.
I think when like several prominent leaders of white supremacist groups in America cite Tucker Carlson as like the voice of truth on TV, and they're like, that's our guy. And he's like, I don't even know what they're talking about. I'm like, well, they do like you. Like, they do like you. They do like you a lot. And he like regularly says words that sound exactly like the 14 words like from Hitler, and like about like white having a white state and a white ethno state and like a homeland for white people. He talks about that regularly, that like he should be able to preserve his culture and heritage, and there should be nothing wrong with that. And that's all like very white supremacist.
Well, so it's interesting because we're in America, right? So like, if you're conservative, so if you're conserving America's heritage, it is multicultural at this point.
It is.
So it's like the ties to here's the thing. We have the heebie-jeebies with nationalism because of the Nazis. Yeah. But if we understand that the point of the government is to operate on behalf of the people or the nation, so there needs to be a tie and a central theme of what is good for the nation and for the people, like, is what the government should be going for. So there's like a healthy nationalism that isn't like, again, there's the formal nationalism, but the issue with these words is it's like, it's if it sounds like nationalism, if it smells like nationalism, if it walks like nationalism, then we're like, well, then it's Hitler. It's not just, you know, these other things. And there are ideas close to it. Like, Hitler gained power because he leveraged truth in just the right way to make people act in just the right way. If you can give someone something to like latch onto that's a partial truth, and they can't have some sort of counterbalanced, nuanced other thing, that's when the extremism happens. That's when they'll just carry that idea beyond any point of sanity. And so I think that like the nationalist, because of America and because of attempts to create multinational countries, the concept of nationalism is has a duality to it, where there's the one branch and then the other branch. Multicultural nationalism is a totally different, you know, it totally negates Nazism in its being framed that way. Multicultural nationalism, like that, you know, we welcome all sorts, but we are, you know, we're a nation. We have borders. We advocate for our citizens above other people, but, you know, we're all humans. Like, there's, you know, a lot of stuff there. But,
yeah.
Anyway, I've really liked this conversation, man. I definitely, if you're, you know, I would love to have it again. I think we have plenty of other things we could get into.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot more we could talk about. I've enjoyed this too. I got to kick on the AC so I'm not killing my partner and her mom who's here right now, because it's like burning hot in our apartment. But this has been fun.
Oh, I'm glad you feel that way. Yeah, I had high hopes for this conversation, but because we are coming from different perspectives, especially in over the last 5 years, you never know if, you know, there's going to be dynamite.
Sure.
Luckily, there was not. We avoided all of the, we made it across the North-South Korea border. And yeah. Have an awesome one, man. Thank you so much for coming
You
on.
too. I appreciate you inviting me. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Have a good one.
Thanks.